Thank you again for coming. We're going to try with the panel discussion. What we'll try to do is maybe dig a little bit deeper in some of the topics that were shared, and also have the opportunity for a little bit of bonus material. Some folks who have come, we are blessed to have people who are in this space, who have done this space for some time, the space of being missional and being on mission out in the world. We have Leighton and Lisa Chinn who are here, and we're going to invite Lisa up as a bonus material. And then also Margaret Cotton, who is a part of Alpha South Carolina. We're going to invite them up to participate in this discussion with us. So just a little bit about these two. Margaret Cotton and I, we have gone back several years. Since 2017, I met Margaret when I was on staff at St. Andrew's Church, and where I began to engage and learn Alpha. And so part of my role was in charge of doing Alpha, and Margaret has been running Alpha South Carolina, helping Alpha to get out into churches in the South Carolina Lowcountry area. And I got to serve on the board with Margaret for close to, 6 years probably. And it was a pleasure doing that, and Margaret and I have obviously kept in touch. And a lot of the stuff that I presented has to do with a lot of the work that Alpha is working with the young generation, and so I invite Margaret up. And Lisa Chinn, the thing that I was given is wonderfully extensive. I won't read her bio. It was awesome, and it was interesting because I didn't know Leighton and Lisa before this, and a friend of ours said, "You need to know who they are, who is coming to your church." And so Lisa has a wonderful ministry. For some time, she's been she served in InterVarsity in various capacities for a long time, rising to being a national director of international student ministries with InterVarsity. Her and her husband Leighton were integral in starting and founding a missions kind of emphasis at Truro in Virginia. So, I mean, they have a lot of wonderful things in regards to mission and being missional. And so I invited Lisa to come and be a part of the discussion as well. So coming out of this time together, or coming back from this time together, from the talks that we have heard, there were a few questions that were brought to my mind. I'd like to start with a little bit more of the culture, laying maybe a deeper culture foundation. And so this is open to anybody, but Patrick, when we are dealing with passing along the knowledge, the information that the generations who have lived, right? Currently, I think that there's at least 5 living generations right now. Sometimes we can count 6. When we look to pass on that information and the gaps that have been developed between those generations and, let's say, Gen Z, when it comes time to pass along truth, it seems as though there's a lot of maybe untruths, like different types of things that are being portrayed as truth. How do we begin to discern that, knowing that we need to do it in a loving, compassionate, kind way? How do we present truth and display truth while there are these competing claims? How do we go about doing that?
Yeah, good question. I think I just heard a talk that had some really good points about that, particularly with Gen Z. But yeah, I think you hit a lot of them. I mean, I think it begins with listening, and it begins with compassion. I mean, Young Life, this great ministry that's had as their kind of cornerstone relationship to ministry, and they've got this statement I'm sure you've all heard, that's earn the right to be heard, and I think that's really key. And I will say one thing that I've found helps to cut through some of the untruths is let me back up. I think it's very easy for us who are involved in institutions and care about institutions. I mean, we're Anglicans, so we kind of have to care about institutions, right? It's easy for us to have a really defensive posture because it feels like that those untruths are undermining and are taking the legs out from everything that we care about and everything we've invested in and wanted to build. And so it's very easy without even noticing it when somebody says something that's not true. It just I can feel even my anxiety rise. Right. So I think that one thing that I found to be very helpful in speaking with Gen Z younger people is to really own up to our own faults in this cultural moment, right? So it's easy a lot of times to say, well, the church has been this shining city on a hill. Like look at our stellar record, look at all the great things. But really, does that hold up to scrutiny? Like, no, it doesn't, right? Everything we have same divorce rates, like same issues that are present in the world are always present in the church because we're sinners, and right, we've got a good answer to that. We have the gospel, we have the Holy Spirit, we have the holiness. But I think actually just owning up to like, hey, we've done you a disservice in maybe several factors. And I think looking at like gender, sexuality, marriage is one where you're going to say like, hey, we maybe as a church have not modeled a high view of marriage like we should have. And it's amazing where if you just kind of allow space for confession, even if it's general, right, it actually creates a new level of trust because you can at least say like, we are broken, we've not done this well. And so I just think it opens up, it builds bridges, I would say. I've been amazed at the times when I've said, hey, we're sorry that we messed this up. People are just like, oh, like, thank you. Like I've never heard someone to the caller apologize. I've heard that comment from people. And I think that one thing I would say to maybe older generations is like, you don't understand how big an apology is. Like how significant it is on behalf of the church. And I think there's clearly something different about, if you're wearing a collar, you are in some ways a representative of the church. And so to own up to our failures, but it's ultimately just our inability to live up to God's call for all of us, right? To fully represent his kingdom, to fully be bastions or little foretastes of God's kingdom. So I think that's maybe one thing. So listening, and Kyle, your talk was great. I think you talked a lot about building bridges, but that's one key thing has been own up to our stuff. And then have a conversation maybe, because you'll very quickly find some points of agreement to begin talking about our different understandings of truth or untruth, lies, that sort of thing. So anyway.
Great. Is there anybody else that can speak into that? Todd, one of the things that you mentioned was that assumptions of culture have changed while the practices of the church has not, right? And to me, it kind of like meets in this realm of this discovery of truth and the transitions of truth, where would it be wrong of us to say that the practices, we hope anyways, that the practices of the church are such because they were founded on truths, right? And now that the assumptions of culture have changed, we would say they're not true, untruths. How do we as the church then, with the understanding that the assumptions of the cultures have changed and the practices of the church has not, first, were you getting at this idea that our practices need to change? Or do they need to be perhaps maybe updated, presented differently? Or is it that the church actually can change some of its practices to meet the new assumptions?
So there was a slide earlier that said Jesus was asked 184 questions and he only answered 3. That's what I'm going to do.
Nice.
So this is I want to answer that very localized to people who are part of our diocese here, and I want to do this very gently because this has been a real painful season for many of us. But I would just say the Diocese of South Carolina has been entrenched in a legal battle for a long time. And we have framed it as a battle over orthodoxy and holding fast to the gospel, which I absolutely believe it's been. I think where that gets blurry is for the last 14 years, whatever we want to say, we have clung to things that were obviously gospel-centered, but I think where it gets blurry is that some things can still change, and yet we remain orthodox in our faith. And I think that's been really kind of blurry for our diocese, of pioneering expressions because they look different than maybe what they have been in the past. Some people might view that as not remaining authentic to the gospel. And I would just say we need to differentiate those two things, that I can remain absolutely authentic to the gospel and what we are called to be as the church, but that doesn't mean the church has to practice everything it has practiced to maintain orthodoxy. So I want to be really gentle in that, but I think that is part of our struggle, is our rub, is like, if we change anything, does that mean that we're messing with orthodoxy? And I would just say it doesn't, because I think part of orthodoxy is maintaining a faithfulness to the lordship of Christ and being led by the Spirit in a way that even the early church looked very different from the 30 years or so that we're seeing the early church in Scripture. I mean, things were changed very quickly, all under the lordship of Christ. And I think that is the tension in leadership of how do we continue to maintain gospel focus and yet allowing certain things to say, those were really good for a season in what the Lord did, and now he's calling us into a new expression. So back to your original 7 questions. I think that is where the part of the gap is I think we do have permission to respond differently to certain things. I think when you think about what the church used to be, it was primarily about the sharing of information. Like if you've ever been to an evangelism conference, it's typically about what to say. Like, so we're taught what to say to someone. And I find the greatest act of evangelism, as you both picked up on, is asking questions now. I particularly love the Gospel of Mark. It's for people with short attention spans. And in Mark alone, Jesus asked 118 questions. So that's on average, Jesus asking a question every 6 verses in the Gospel of Mark. And we just gloss over that we make evangelism about what we want to tell people instead of just asking question after question, not in a way to convert them, but as an expression of us loving them. And there is a big difference. Like, is that person my project to convert? Or is God genuinely giving me a heart for that person to love them well? That would be my starting point for that. But the Alpha Queen probably has something to say too.
Thank you. No, I of course speak a lot from the lens of Alpha, but the Alpha model is in the small groups of not having any teaching, of listening, of asking questions. And one of the hardest things I find when I'm training churches and training their small groups is that the people want to teach. They want to answer the questions. They want to tell people they're wrong. You know, like if someone in a small group says, well, I have a crystal collection, and the tendency of a lot of the strong Christians would be, oh my gosh, no, that's heresy, that's wrong. And what we say in Alpha is that you have to say, wow, that's interesting. What does anyone else think? You don't correct people. And I think for the younger generation in particular, they want to be listened to, and they want to ask their questions. And so, you know, again, speaking from the lens of Alpha, that's really what Alpha is all about, is letting people share, letting people ask whatever they want, not making any kind of judgment about what they're saying that any question is not too simple or not too complex.
Yeah, I think a follow-up question to that, I think with Lisa, with your extensive work, the assumptions, having assumptions changed culturally, right, along the lines of culture. I know that you shared with me a little bit about how your ministry of we're talking about we've been talking about generational cultures, but we also know that there is an incredible, there's gaps in regards to racial cultures and where people are from, right? Those types of things. And so how have you seen being missional across cultures, not just generationally, but across cultures? How have you seen this play out?
Well, having left home, which is the Philippines, to come as a missionary to the United States. Now, that feels strange, right? A little Asian country coming to the big USA to be a missionary. But it really is not in many ways, because the early understanding of mission was really from the West to the rest. And that has changed. It is now from everywhere to everywhere, because God's people are maturing in places where they were young churches, where places where they were the recipient of the good news from the powerful countries. Now, when it comes to crossing culture, because of my experience, is I see life cross-culturally all the time. Whether it's being married to my husband, that's a cross-cultural experience, or living in our new neighborhood of 55 and over. We just moved there in March. Seeing life through the lens of culture is really learning from the people that you are with. Always assuming that my 13-year-old, who is my grandson, who is Gen Z, he's another culture. So what does it mean for me to understand him as if I'm understanding a culture? What's important to him? How do I show interest without embarrassing him with my questions? So my husband and I would always say, honey, zip. We don't ask questions, we are responders. But it is about learning and respecting the culture. I came here and I had to learn the culture, the American culture. I have to listen. I have to understand what they're saying. I thought, that was a straight English expression, but then it's completely different when they say you're walking on ice. Well, in Wisconsin, where I live, yes, you do. But all I'm saying is, if we look at life cross-culturally all the time, people are different from us. So what does it take for me to enter that culture? To be healthily curious. The way that you were talking, Todd, the cashier, how to have relationship. I come from a highly relational culture, so we don't need to be taught how to relate. We need to downplay our relationship, because either we get too nosy, But in this culture, we need to learn how to be interested in people. It seemed like, why is this so hard for people to do when, you can ask questions, you can be curious, you can be excessively curious. But all to say is through that lens, because my work with people of other cultures, like this Muslim student, a Muslim guest, he said that his journey of conversion came because he tasted his first zucchini bread. That is displaying the kingdom. A neighbor came and gave them zucchini bread as newcomers. And he traced his conversion through that welcome, we mentioned that, and hospitality and listening. So that's really kind of a very general statement on that. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that having an awareness of the different ways at which we're dealing with different people, both within generations and within cultures, maybe cultures within the same generation, and then generations to cultures differences. And I think one of the things that it's going to require of us, and maybe we can bounce off kind of like these kinds of things, is like, what do we see that is natural to us now in the way that we have, let's say, the cultures that the generations that we have, that have created barriers to doing what you were saying, Lisa, always be thinking cross-culturally. Like, what are the types of things within us that we need to now become aware of to begin to shift our attentiveness to? Does that question resonate?
Can I just say quickly? I think when we get to a place where we are always right and we have arrived at a place where we are superior, therefore we're not interested in anybody else because we are comfortable with our group, with our beliefs. There is no curiosity about other people. There is no willingness to learn from other people. I think that's the humility that we heard, the 4 speakers today, is that willingness to admit, like you're saying, that we don't know everything. So I think the tendency to get to a place of safety and security where we become the bastion of truth and the other else are different replications of lies. I mean, that is not a good place for the church to be, I feel, if we are always learning. And I think the best way to learn is when we are welcoming all kinds of people. That the gospel is not the way you understood as white people, because other people see the gospel differently. Wow, never seen it that way. It humbles me because I thought my understanding was right and it should be right for everybody. So that sense of our claim to being right, not saying let's not be orthodox, but the willingness to humble ourselves. But tell me, what is this like in your culture? Or tell me what it's like for a Gen Z. Of course, I will not call my grandson Gen Z. He will not like that. So just tell me what you like, honey. What do you like for your birthday? Whatever it is. But
Yeah, thank you.
So you touched on the word comfort, and I think that's really something to think about with our culture, in that a lot of the good advice that we want to pass along to generations after us is to allow them to not experience the same pains that we experienced, right? I mean, all really well-intentioned. Like, I don't want my son to make the same mistakes I make, so I want him to listen to me about certain things. And I just want to ask, how did that work for us? Not well, right? We still had to go through it. And on some level, I've been amazed lately. Here's a challenge for you. I want you to find a kid with a cast, because they don't exist anymore. Have you noticed that? I mean, think about how many of us broke arms or legs as kids because we fell off the jungle gym or did stuff we weren't supposed to. You rarely see kids with casts anymore. Why? Because our culture has gotten so comfort absorbed that kids actually aren't allowed to do anything. They're not allowed to take risks. They're not allowed to fail. They're not allowed. It's well intentioned, but as parents, we were trying to protect from pain. Understand, when you try to absolve someone from pain, it means they never actually grow into who God is calling them to be. We do not live in the promised land. We live in the wilderness. And a lot of our expressions of life are in response to pain. And so part of this is approaching any other generation and honoring the pain they're in. Like with a younger generation that struggles with anxiety, okay, so my daughter comes home and she's stressed, right? And I want to be like, what are you stressed about? You don't have a mortgage. So I want to compare her stress to mine, right? Which does not honor her, and it also does not help her to navigate what it is to be stressed. And so no matter who you meet, no matter how small the thing is that they're going through, don't minimize it. Encourage them to say, that is hard. How are you taking the next step? How can you walk with them in that, as opposed to fixing it? How do we help people navigate a pain in which they're walking through it? And in that way, I think the church becomes this resource again, not for avoiding pain, but for knowing it. right? So kind of a side topic, but when you talked about comfort, I'm just struck. The next time you see a kid with a cast, it's like fill up your bingo board for the day because they just don't exist anymore. Like they're just protected in a way. And I think that's almost a reflection of something bigger that's going on in culture.
Yeah, thank you.
Say a quick comment about that is the participation trophies. Everybody wins. Nobody's learning that they sometimes fail, that they're not going to win. And so we've tried to compensate and say, oh, we'll give you a certificate anyway for recognition.
Yeah. And I think this falls in line with various things. It's like this is a part of the generation that was created for them. Right, so I think it comes to us owning the fact that the generations prior are implicated in the creation of this, and it's only our attempt to recognize, oh my gosh, what you're going through was our fault. Have we ever said that to them, right? And then to be able to begin to engage that process, it's through the process of humiliation. And so I think about like humble and humiliation are cognates. They work together. They're part of the same kind of framework of understanding. When you are humiliated, there's kind of two tracks that you can go on. You can become humble or you can become cynical. Right? These are the two tracks within humiliation. Right? If I am humiliated, and I try to double down and I stand harder on the thing that I have, I become cynical about it. I try to hold fast to everything. But if I say, oh, wow, I'm humiliated right now, I really messed up, and then I choose apologizing or I choose that type of thing, I become a more humble person. So humiliation is a key thing in every part of our lives, and how we deal with the humiliations, I think, speak to our opportunities that we have with people cross-culturally, with people of the younger generations, to be able to do that. They want to see humble people who are taking their humiliation on the chin and owning it, and then working along those lines to pass that along. Right? Thank you for that question. Y'all's responses were awesome. I think we want to try to end with, if there's an opportunity for us to see what are some practical ways that, a lot of times there's a book, I forgot who wrote it. I think it's about 7 years old now, but it's called The Art of Neighborliness. Familiar with the book? The Art of Neighborliness. And one of the things that we have been told to do is to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And that this is one of the key aspects of a missional life. How do we love our neighbors as we love ourselves to fulfill that great commandment? What are some practical ways that you all know of loving your neighbor? How can we begin to do that, take that step of loving our neighbor?
Well, again, I'm speaking a bit from the lens of Alpha, but I train, churches and prisons and campuses to run Alphas, and a lot of the Alphas are very big. They're 50 people, 75, 100 people. My feeling is we should go small and let Alphas be outposts. And the best thing I can think of is in a neighborhood, have your neighbors run a small Alpha. You can download the talks, you can invite neighbors to come over and sit and have a meal with a few people. I'm thinking of a particular church in Mount Pleasant that did this. They had a fairly strong set of small groups, I think 10 or 12. And what they did one year is they said, every small group now is going to run an Alpha on the same schedule. And we want you to invite your neighbors, people that are not in your small group. And it's in a very non-threatening way. Just, hey, come to the house and get to know us. And then the interesting spin that they took on it is then they had the pastor that Sunday preach the message of whatever the talk had been for the small group that week. And it was an easy thing for them to then say to the people in their small group, hey, if you really liked what we were doing, why don't you come out to church and hear a little bit more about it. But I think the small groups in people's homes can be the outposts that Ken and Todd's talking about. I've worked with the Citadel for years, and they've done Alpha with 125, 150, 170 cadets. But they tried an experiment last year where they said, let's stop doing it that way, and let's have each battalion run an Alpha. So the battalions were small. They were 10 or 15 guys. And so they were running Alphas in each battalion instead of one big Alpha. So I think the whole outport idea is perfect with small groups and Alpha.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
Well, I think very practical, and it doesn't sound, not to sound spiritual, is to really begin praying. My husband and I walk around in our neighborhood, and we call it our missionary journey. We actually name the neighbors. And we're new in the neighborhood, so every time we meet a neighbor, we have a little sheet of paper. Okay, which one was that again, honey? Oh, across the street. Okay, write the name, write the husband's name, we have this list. So because people have names, people's names need to be remembered. That's very simple courtesy, is when they see you, they say hi, and they know your name. But then also, opportunities abound. Naturally, you're just talking about the sprinkler system. You're talking about the pest control, okay? But, you don't immediately say the gospel. Oh, yeah, the best pest control is God and our sin. And no. I mean, be who you are. Be the person that God made you to be. In that context of spontaneity, there is authenticity, okay? So my neighbors, they're all foreigners. They moved from Ohio, New Jersey. They all love this neighborhood in South Carolina. And so, hey, I'm at home. These are all foreigners. But as we talk with them, we find out. He said, hey, we don't have any friend here. My next door neighbor says, oh, I'm sorry, you missed the distribution list. We had a gathering. He said, oh, I'd like to be on that list. So I put them on that list. And my husband is a little depressed. I said, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way. And he said, well, what does your husband want to do? And he likes to play Uno. And in my mind, I said, not Uno, Lord. I don't like Uno. It's too childish, not challenging enough. But the Lord was saying, are you going to play Uno for the sake of the kingdom? And guess what? We invited them for an Uno game. And they stayed forever. 2 hours, 2.5 hours. But all it took was the curiosity. But it is really constrained by the love of God, because we want them to know who Jesus is, but in a very natural setting. So I think we're due for another Uno game. But the other thing is, our South African neighbors have been. Just the other night, they were in our home. So how do you use your home to be a place, not a threatening place, but a welcoming place? And sometimes we think of hospitality as Martha Stewart version of it. If it's not all that clean, it's okay. I mean, I like my house clean, but it's how we welcome people, what they pick up from us when they enter our home. So pray, and those opportunities will come, and be ready when it comes.
Yeah, thank you.
Just add to that, from my experience, loving your neighbors is not that hard, but knowing your neighbors is almost impossible. I've lived in downtown Charleston for almost 15 years, and I've lived in about 5 different neighborhoods in the city. And I think the context is unique because it's very transient. So most of the people that lived around us at various points are renters. At one point, we were the only people that owned our home on the whole block, like hundreds of houses. And but over the last 3 years, we have set our face towards actually knowing our neighbors. And it's just, I love the idea of prayer walks. I've been walking through my neighborhood, and that is a great way to do that. We've also found that just like being present very often in our neighborhood park is an amazing way to get to know people. It still takes a long time. People are very mistrustful of connections and relationships. It's a very cynical and distrust is high, right? But it just takes intentional steps to push through those. And oftentimes I feel like I have to see someone at the park like 20 times before they're willing to actually carry on a conversation with me. They're in their own little world, they're dealing with their kids, and then they're there, and then they go into their house and they never come back out. So I would say that just being present, and the other thing is this is not an option for everybody, but trying to intentionally know your neighbors with a group of other people is a bit of a shortcut, a bit of a cheat code as well. So we've got pockets now of friends all within like 8 or 10 blocks of us. And I'm amazed at how that has increased our kind of awareness for missional opportunities. One of our neighbors is really involved in the like park system, and so she's always letting us know, hey, they're doing this festival here, and she'll often say, hey, what if our community group gathered together at this park, and what if we just like gave out popsicles? And it's just like, I needed her because I'm not on that distribution list. I needed that recommendation. And then our whole group goes, and I'm amazed at the number of conversations we're able to have with people to kind of just till the soil, just kind of soften the soil for the seeds of the gospel. And you just have to be present enough to know. I just got a call yesterday from one of my neighbors there was a shooting a couple blocks from my house a few days ago, and he said, hey, did you know that the person that was shot is our friend Chris? And Chris is like known by everybody in the neighborhood. His mom just passed away, and he was like, hey, what if we kind of gather together and support him and cook for him and like bring groceries in and things like that. And so I wouldn't have known that though if I didn't have a network of people who were all trying to intentionally network. And so I think doing it together with a church or with a community group or some kind of small group. But I guess I'm just amazed at the pull towards status quo is so strong. And you have to really be very intentional. Maybe it's just me. I have to be very intentional to like force myself out of my normal, comfortable, day-to-day routine and rhythm. I have to force myself to walk across the street and introduce myself to a new neighbor that walked in. I also would say that I've been learning my next door neighbor has taught us an incredible lesson in neighborliness, and that she's just started every holiday. She just brings a little gift over for our children, and she has no vested interest in our children. She's much older than us. We've not had a ton of interaction and conversation, but I would say she just like started bringing us stuff. So it turns out maybe gifts are a good way to like get to know people. But yeah, Christmas, Valentine's Day, all the Hallmark holidays, she just comes over. And the other day, my son he just finished 8th grade, and now when you graduate 8th grade, everybody puts signs in their yard. That was not a thing when I was a kid, but it is now evidently. Speaking of everyone gets a trophy, like everyone got to celebrate it. Anyway, but yeah, she just walked over and just gave him the sweetest card. And so I'm learning how to be a neighbor from my neighbor intentional way. So I just think for me, it takes a lot of focus and intentionality to get out of, the rhythms that all of us are in, to be isolated and individual and kind of in our own little bubbles. So,
Yeah. Thank you.
Here's a really simple one. Like all of us keep our grills in our backyard, right? It's kind of our private space. Commit to once a month and let your neighbors know, like first Friday, I'm putting the grill in the driveway. Bring over whatever you're gonna grill. And like, you're not feeding the neighborhood, you're just providing the grill. And you get to stand around the grill with your neighbors. It's just like, we do that in the backyard, isolated. Just bring your grill to the front yard and let your neighbors know. We're gonna call it First Friday, bring the grill. So just like little things that you're already doing, instead of protected, just put them out in front of people.
Yeah. I think there's a spin.
Standing, you're all invited, First Friday. Just say.
Nice. Fripp Island, we'll be there. Yeah, I think that kind of like a spin on the idea from the book, The Art of Neighborliness. On the cover of the book is a table. It's tic-tac-toe. A picnic table, right? A picnic table. And he tells this story, the author tells this story about how he moved his picnic table from the backyard to the front yard. And it ended up becoming a hub for the neighborhood. When people would walk their dogs, he would say hi to them and everything like that. And he ended up learning the art of neighborliness through simply moving his picnic table from his backyard to his front yard. That's great. Lastly, maybe, one more question. We talked about being yourself, and that was a wonderful wonderful thing. I'm going to use that. The best pest control is Jesus. But how can we naturally bring up, how do we prepare ourselves, perhaps, maybe, to naturally bring up spiritual conversations or bring up the gospel with our neighbors whom we're engaging? That's our final question.
So we used an analogy in Alpha of a gear shift, and of course a lot of young people don't know how to use a gear shift anymore, so I don't know that the analogy is going to work as well. But we say, you start with gear 1, and gear 1 is just a conversation, how are you today, what's going on, and then gear 2 will be a little bit more detailed information, like what's going on in your life, where do you work, and then moving to gear 3, and eventually you're building the relationship, you're building the rapport where it's almost natural to maybe talk more about faith. And like a gear shift, if you shift gears too fast, you stall. So the idea is you start moving forward, and if you sense hesitation, if you sense it's not the best thing to do, you shift back to the gear before. So that's kind of an interesting way to
that's
look
cool.
at it.
Thank you.
We've talked a lot about asking questions and asking good questions, and I feel like sometimes as Christians we're like waiting for that opening to pounce, like they showed that moment of weakness and now I'm going for it, like 4 spiritual laws or something. And I feel like I know I've asked enough questions when that person starts to ask questions of me. And I feel like that changes the environment. Like it's no longer just me being inquisitive, but I've suddenly cared enough for that person that they want to know more about me. And so I don't want to make a blanket statement. I would probably not press many spiritual things until that person has started to be comfortable asking questions of me. And so at that point, it's relationship. It's not the project. Like projects are one directional, and I want to make sure that relationship is established, that there's enough common ground that both of us are asking questions.
Yeah, that's great. Love that.
I think we should relax. We don't want to just say, okay, now is this the moment? I mean, they can pick up the tension when we're trying to pounce on them with the gospel. It is good news, so let's not make it complicated and make it uneven in terms of either power, struggle, or relational distance with the person. When we were invited to the home of our South African friends, my husband is very good at crossing streets. I talk about crossing cultures. He crosses the street. And then before I know it, I met the neighbor. I said, which one this time? I crossed the street. And that has always been, for my husband, his modus operandi. He crosses the street. And then asking questions, or when do we bring the good news? I think first we have to be the good news in many ways, okay? And the good works that we do so that they become the stage for the good news. It softens people's hearts. But I think even naturally saying, we've been praying about this home, drop a little bit of natural thing you say to anybody about, I'm praying about this, or even asking the question, like when we conversed, I forgot I mentioned this, but the other day my South African friend said, Lisa, you mentioned that you have a conversation about aging. And I said, yes. You think we can have that here? I said, okay, Lord. When you're doing something, it's not me asking, but it looks like there's an opportunity for a conversation about aging. I mean, if you are talking about aging, God will be there because God loves senior citizens. Talk about Simeon and Anna and Abraham and all those oldies that were called by God. But anyway, it's going to be, I think we need, like I said, to relax, lower our expectations of ourselves, raise our expectations of God. Because God will come in even when you're not ready. Let's have that kind of expectation. Let's not settle for, well, I'm not comfortable with people. I'm an introvert. God didn't say any excuses like that for us. We are witnesses. Whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, we are to be that witnesses. And I think it's those natural ways that God will give us the words to say. And then eventually, they will come and have a Bible study with you, or maybe show up at church or to Alpha.
Yeah, thank you.
So I used to find myself at cocktail parties in our neighborhood. And this happened very frequently whenever our kids were little and they were coming into a new school. And I just got to a place where I so dreaded them asking me what I did. Because every time we would be having great conversation, Todd, I would do a really good job asking all kinds of questions. I mean, just like I was full Jesus mode, just asking question after question. And then eventually the conversation would slow just enough that they would say, well, what do you do? And there were times where I would kind of be evasive and say, well, I work in the nonprofit sector. I'm honest. I'm trying to be honest here. But inevitably, if I said, well, I'm a pastor, they would just spit their drink back into the cup. I mean, I'm serious. It happened multiple times. People and then they would feel bad for the curse words that they'd said, and it just got super awkward, and they would walk away. So I've been very hesitant to do some of the things that these wonderful panelists have inserted into the conversation. But personally, in the last couple of years, I've noticed a real shift. And now I just say, I'm a Canon Vicar. Not really.
That's right.
I have, though, begun to say, like, hey, I'm a priest, and I work at a church. And I will say, since COVID, since we went through this kind of, and again, it's anecdotal, this is just my experience, but we went through this massive global suffering together. Everybody experienced it. And it didn't matter how much money you made. It didn't matter where you lived, what city you lived in, or what country you lived in. All of us suffered, and all of our comforts and illusions of self-sufficiency were all pulled away. And I think there's a real openness, and I'm sensing that as I talk to people, because now, rather than stopping the conversation and walking away to get more drinks, what they do is they lean in, and like, oh. And I find people just saying, like, oh, I had this spiritual experience at camp when I was 17, and I haven't thought about it in a long time. Do you think that was real? Do you think something actually happened? And so I'm able to like have these conversations. I've got open doors that I've not maybe ever had. Again, I'm 41, so it's really my adult life. And I thank God for it. And I'm just want to be faithful. So I'm not there yet. I'm trying to figure it out, but I'm trying to encourage. In a low pressure. I love what you said. You're low pressure, big expectations on God, but also maybe sometimes just roll the dice. Just like, hey, have you ever been in a church? Do you know what? Have you ever practiced any kind of faith? Like I'm just kind of allowing myself to dream about asking these kind of broader conversations, because I notice that actually that's a way to care for them, because people are interested in spirituality more and more. And so I'm praying and I'm trying, and I'll let you know. Maybe if we do this in a couple of years, I'll let you know how it's going. It could go horribly wrong, but I trust that God will do something good through it. So that's
yeah. Now similar with me, ever since the kids have been in school for the last couple of years, and we're developing these friendships with other parents and whatnot, and they slowly are learning what I do for a living. I don't have to worry about bringing up the spiritual conversation. They don't know that they're about to. They ask me, what do you do? Oh, well, do you want me to tell you? And but what I have found is that even when that happens, when I'm open to this, I say, yeah, I'm a priest, I lead a church, and almost every single time. Like one time we were on a party bus on the way to the gala, and I'm in the back, and Courtney's looking at me because she knows that I'm engaged in a deep spiritual conversation with this dude on the back of a party bus, and she was like, what are you doing? This is a party bus. But it's because he asked me what I did, But I think that one of the easiest ways, and you mentioned it, this prayer idea, is to just casually, because the reality is that almost everybody is prayerful, right? In Alpha we recognize, we understand that everybody prays. Different religions pray. Even atheists would claim that they pray. and that makes no sense to me. But even atheists will claim that they sometimes pray. So if you just mention, hey, I'll pray for that. Like if you know someone's going through a hard time, say, hey, I'll be praying for that. And they might say, are you a praying person? What kind of praying person do you? Well, I'm actually a Christian praying person. And then it can go along in those lines. So I find that to be a very easy and effective way to bring up spiritual conversations. But all of this as we do it, I think one of the key indicators, one of the key things that we need to keep in mind is that you're not doing it in your own power. However the situation, however the conversation of being missional goes, when you attempt to do this, we're looking to be filled with the words to say by the power of the Spirit, right? When the first martyr, Stephen, stood up, he relied on the Holy Spirit to give him the words to say at that moment. And that's what each one of us has to do. We don't go into this with fear and, with fear in regards to like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't do this. This isn't for me, that type of thing. But we go in it trusting and relying on the Spirit to drive us into these places if we would just but submit to Him in our lives. Thank you, panel. Thank you for our two bonus additions, our bonus panelists up here, Margaret and Lisa. We really appreciate you. Loved what you had to share. I know that it will benefit all of us. Thanks to Patrick and Todd. Thank you for coming and spending your day with us on Saturday. It's been a blessing to all of us, I know, and so thank you for that. We'll take just a couple of minutes break, and we'll reconvene back for a few testimonies from a few men here at Christ St. Paul's who have had God reshape their lives and reorganize their lives to do mission work alongside their everyday life. So we'll jump into that after about a 5-minute break.